the Rudder. My name's Brooke and we are here on Antoinette, our Mary Fisher 895. Thankfully, we are safely back at home after an eventful couple of nights. So I'm here with Damien and we're going to talk you through what happened last night. We woke up at 2 a.m. to a fast approaching storm. Now, I want to explain that normally we don't go out when the weather looks poor, but this storm, they sent out a storm warning at 12:30 in the middle of the night, which obviously we didn't get, and then at 2 a.m. we were faced with quite an interesting scenario. So let me explain to you how the day started. We started at Peel Island, which was a beautiful spot. We spent the day swimming and playing with our puppy dogs with quite a few other boats. And then at 4 in the afternoon, we decided to move to our anchorage for the night. And so I'm going to hand over to Damien now and let him explain how we weathered the storm successfully. So Damien, tell us how it all unfolded and what happened because you obviously woke up before I did. What woke you up?
Lightning. So just picking up on what you said there, so yeah, we don't usually go out in storms. We live in the subtropics in Australia, so we can get some pretty large thunderstorms and thunderheads. So we're usually really aware of those, and we'll put off a day of boating because they can be pretty catastrophic. So the annoying thing was all the weather reports had 0 rain predicted, and there was one that had 10% chance of some rain, and 0.4 of a mil was what they suspected might rain. So that certainly didn't happen. I think at the end of the day there was 28 mils fell in about half an hour, but that's later on. So from Peel Island, which is about 35 nautical miles due north of here, we had an awesome day on the water, hundreds of other boats out. It was a very crowded spot, and we'll talk more about that later. And we went back to an anchorage that we affectionately call Turtle Bay, and because there's heaps of turtles there, it's the very top edge of Russell Island, and there was a north-facing wind most of the night, and it was essentially Russell Island curves around, so we were just inside there, snuggled up right close to Russell Island in Turtle Bay. It's a fairly shallow anchorage.
So when we arrived at Turtle Bay, affectionately known as Turtle Bay because you can be anchored there and little turtles pop their heads up. So we actually don't know what it's called, but we call it Turtle Bay. We're happy with that. So when we arrived, we were in about 1.5 meters of water, and the tide was dropping, and I think it was going to drop to 900 at the lowest. So I put 10 meters of anchor chain out, and then we spent the next few hours having dinner and relaxing before going to bed. Then what happened at 2 a.m., Damien?
Yeah, so it's pretty important, as Brooke said. I mean, we don't put tons of anchor chain out. It's a very shallow, usually really protected space. And the other big thing that we always do is put on a anchor boundary on the Garmin. So if you somehow float outside that, the circle boundary, it sounds an alarm. I usually set that boundary pretty close in, so if we, in the middle of the night, as the tide turns, we'll often go outside that circle, and that's fine. I get up, check the anchor, just make sure everything's fine. So we had the anchor boundary set up. There weren't any boats around us. The land was pretty close. But yeah, so we had the boundary set up, which was fine. So yeah, woke up at around 2 a.m. to some pretty good light show, and it was luckily, I guess the best thing was that I woke up before the storm was upon us. So yeah, woke up with lots of lightning, and quickly checked the BOM, as it's affectionately called in Australia, the Bureau of Meteorology, and there was a pretty significant storm front heading right for us. And as Brooke mentioned, I found out later that they did put out a storm warning at 12:30 in the middle of the night, which really wasn't helpful. So we had probably 10 minutes of time to get everything prepared. So I woke Brooke up, which she wasn't that impressed with. So the first thing I did is we use an anchor snubber, which means I can't just let out chain on the go. We need to undo the anchor snubber. So I undid the anchor snubber and pressed down.
Tell us why you let so much anchor chain out.
So letting anchor chain out just means there's more anchor, there's more chain and anchor to hold you in the wind. We were in shallow water, but the draft on Antoinette is really good, so I wasn't really concerned about that. So we just let chain out. I didn't want to go to the rope bit of the road. I wanted to stay on chain, so I just pressed down on the anchor for a while. I couldn't see anything, so it was really a guess. And it ended up that I put out another 10 meters of chain. So we had 20 meters of chain in about a meter of water by the time the storm hit. I did put the snubber back on.
So tell us why you put the snubber back on when you let more anchor chain out, Damien.
So the snubber goes around the two cleats at the front, is rope, 3-strand rope, and it joins to the chain by a hook, and it takes the weight off the windlass. So if you just leave the chain attached to the windlass is actually the device that's holding the entire boat. So you do have a possibility that you can break the windlass, because there's a lot of pressure coming through that. It also means that it's attached to 2 points of the boat and it's rope, so it does have some stretch in it, so it's not all chain. So that gives you a little bit of bounce in the system, so it can stretch as you get thrown around, which happened later.
Once I was awake and realised what was upon us, I ran around and brought everything inside, because when we went to bed everything was quite calm, so we had quite a few towels and things hanging out drying. So I checked the sup was secured. Also, luckily, the tender was safely secured on the tender rack, so that was great. And I went around and brought all of the cushions in, and I stacked them inside, including the teak table, just because obviously we were a long way from home, so the next day everything would have been completely saturated. So brought everything inside while Damien was sort of planning his next steps. So by this point, the thunder and the lightning was getting quite intense, and these two, little Molly and Pippa, they were not very happy. So yeah, let's talk about what happened next once the storm hit us.
So once we were all locked up, we had all the doors shut, everything shut up, so we were watertight, which was fantastic. I mean, the Mary Fisher 895 really, in the amount of rain that we had, not a drop of rain came inside the cabin, so that was fantastic. A lot of water came inside the cockpit, even though we had screens up, it was drenched out there. So it was a traditional subtropical thunderstorm. You get a big blow at the front, so a heap of wind, very gusty wind hits about 2 or 3 minutes before the rain starts. So in that bit, it was a northerly wind, and this storm came from the south, so it completely flipped the boat around. So the alarm went off because I'd let so much chain out. Now the circle boundary that I originally had was a bit useless, so I was busy trying to redraw that at the same time, so it'd give me some kind of measurement of where we were. But it flipped us around on the anchor, and with that wind, and that was gusting I think somewhere into the 30 knot zone, so it was pretty gusty. And so we got flung around with just the wind, and the anchor was holding fine, and then the rain hit and it was a lot of rain. There was only a few lights around, and there was a couple of yachts, probably
They were about 200, 300 meters
200
away.
meters away, but it gave me their anchor lights were on, which was great. Gave me a point of reference, so I could see which way was due south at that point. So I had a chance of sort of seeing where we were, and I had 2 lights from someone's house that I could kind of measure where we were in terms of the shore. And you can have a look at the way we got thrown around on the Garmin. We've got a picture coming up now that I think we were dragging anchor, because I had to redraw the circle and make it bigger several times because we kept on going outside there. So I think it was a muddy floor there on the seabed, so whether the anchor just pull out through the mud or just literally squiggle itself along. I'm not really sure, but at the end of the day, I started getting worried about that because there are some rocks at the very end of that point. So I ended up turning a motor on and just gently engaging it into forward just to take some pressure off the anchor.
So what was your theory behind turning on the engines? Because I know when we've actually talked about what we would do if we were faced with a storm. So tell us your theory behind doing that.
So we were getting thrown basically about probably 90 degrees each way. Having the engine on means you've got some forward momentum, so it diminished that swinging we did, and it also, my idea was it would take some pressure off the chain. My worry, of course, was that if I was driving too far forward, I'd drive over the chain and, well, in the worst case scenario, snarl the propeller, but also could live, so the anchor's not doing its job. So I was trying to cut a fine balance between making the anchor still do the work, but just giving it a bit of support with the engine.
So tell us about what you did with the throttles. Like, where were you at? Just
Barely.
Nudging it on and then pulling it off. Okay.
First click, just to get the propeller spinning, and then I'd click it off again and try and see where we were. As I said, it was pitch dark. It was really hard to see where I was compared with everything else. And from the GPS, we were moving quite a way. You can see from the GPS arc, we started up, and I can show you where the storm hit, because I remember we flung a really long way in one direction, and you can see as we moved around, as probably the storm front came through, we moved in different directions. So the whole storm event was about half an hour until the winds were back down into a reasonable level, which was about 10 knots by the time it all finished.
So for the rest of the evening, there was not much sleep to be had. So as I said, we first found out that the storm was coming at about 2 a.m. For the rest of the night, because we'd let so much anchor chain out, the alarms kept going off, both the depth alarm and also the GPS alarm. So poor Damien had to keep getting up to check that we were still okay. At first light, we got up and we were really grateful that we'd weathered the storm. Everything was completely saturated, but all was good. The engines were close to a crab pot, so we were quite lucky that the rope of the crab pot didn't catch around the propeller, but at the end of the day, all good. So we made our way home. Interestingly enough, on the way home, about 2 k's around the corner, we saw a bit of a grass fire. So obviously some lightning had started a grass fire. So yeah, it was a fairly intense storm. So intense that when we got home, we found out what carnage happened up at Peel Island that night. So as Damien told you, there was quite a few boats anchored there, and we left at about 4 p.m. By that time, there was still probably over 100 boats there. Some quite large boats. One in particular was about 80 meters, 70 or 80 meters long. And so Damien can tell you what happened to the boats up at Peel Island that night.
Well, I don't have first-hand knowledge, but yeah, essentially through Facebook, there was a big motor yacht called Rascal, which we passed, and it was a very good-looking boat. And apparently, sometime in the night, it got thrown around with the storm and started dragging anchor. And I'm not sure if it's her own anchor or it got someone else's anchor chain, but snarled the propellers, so left poor Rascal adrift, and apparently collected a few other boats along the way. And I've heard also from some other Facebook reports that there were a few other collisions, and someone hit the rocks as well. So quite thankful we didn't decide to stay up at Peel Island. It is a beautiful anchorage there, but to a southerly storm, it was not protected at all.
So that's a little bit of an insight into our adventures and how we weathered the storm. Huge thanks to Damien for keeping us safe. Once again, some brilliant captaining of Antoinette. So we learned a lot from that experience, and we're glad we successfully weathered the storm. So if you guys have been through a similar situation, please feel free to leave some comments below, and